In today's world, full of stress and challenges, many people find themselves trapped in anxiety, the roots of which lie in an obsessive desire for control. This isn't just about trying to manage external circumstances like work, finances, or daily tasks. It's also about a deep internal need for certainty. It's an exhausting desire to know what will happen in the future and an all-encompassing aspiration for a complete understanding of one's personality, desires, and life path. Society often pushes us to seek definitive answers, portraying life as a simple mathematical problem. However, few are willing to admit that this very obsession with certainty distances us from achieving the inner peace everyone so desperately seeks. Perhaps many feel tired and exhausted from fruitless attempts to predict the unpredictable, from creating flawless plans that crumble at the slightest touch of randomness. Perhaps they live in a constant state of anxiety, where any uncertainty is perceived as a threat, and the unknown appears as an enemy to be conquered. But what if the source of the problem isn't uncertainty itself? What if the true cause of suffering lies in an unwillingness to accept it as an integral part of life? Michel de Montaigne, the eminent French thinker of the 16th century, grasped this truth long before many of us. In an era when the world craved dogmas, unshakable truths, and closed systems, he did something extraordinary. He turned his gaze inward. He intently observed the workings of his own mind, his fears, internal contradictions, and dared to put it all down on paper with ruthless sincerity. Not as a sage who possessed all the answers, but as a person who learned to coexist more harmoniously with unresolved questions. And this is precisely what each of us needs now, to abandon imposed certainties and build new relationships with what is beyond our control. The author proposes a different path, an easier and simultaneously bolder way to look at life. He intends to demonstrate, drawing on Montaigne's wisdom, that a transformation occurs when one stops resisting the unknown. Anxiety gradually recedes. Internal tension lessens. And for the first time in a long time, life begins to seem simpler and clearer. But caution must be exercised. This simplicity does not come from external sources. It is not about external changes in the surrounding world. It is a genuine internal revolution. And it begins the moment one decides to let go, to abandon the illusory control, and to embark on a path that leads not to ready answers, but to an entirely new way of existing in this world. Prepare for a unique intellectual adventure, the starting point of which is the paradoxical statement, "I don't know, and that's okay." Michel de Montaigne, a figure who transcends the typical image of a philosopher, did not strive to create strict doctrines or rational explanations of the universe. His method lay in deep self-analysis and the profound understanding of personal experience. Secluding himself in his library, surrounded by books and silence, he turned to the study of the most complex and changeable object, himself. His works are not treatises, but rather mirrors reflecting his inner world and inviting the reader to reflection, doubt, and fearless self-knowledge. Unlike philosophers who sought universal truths, Montaigne chose a different path, acknowledging his own ignorance. As he lived, he became convinced that recognizing the limits of one's knowledge about the world and oneself is not a weakness, but a manifestation of wisdom. His constant question, "What do I know?" was not a provocation, but a starting point for self-analysis. The admission of ignorance, in Montaigne's view, was not an intellectual defeat, but a liberation from pretense and the need to conform to imposed standards. It allowed him to shed masks and abandon the burden of omniscience, invincibility, and infallibility. In the modern world, humility and moderation are increasingly pushed aside, giving way to categorical statements and unwavering certainty in one's own righteousness. Our society dictates the need to have an opinion on every issue, to take a clear stance, and to express unequivocal judgments. However, Montaigne offers a completely different approach. He urges us to remain human above all else, not hostages to ideological dogmas. He sincerely believed that our inherent weaknesses, doubts, and contradictions are not flaws to be eradicated, but integral traits that make us alive and authentic. Perhaps this idea is especially relevant now. There is no need to maintain an illusion of infallibility to be worthy of respect. It is not necessary to possess comprehensive knowledge to move forward. Being imperfect is perfectly normal. Montaigne was not afraid to change his convictions, to admit contradictions in his reasoning. He recognized that yesterday's truths might lose their relevance today. He understood that the human mind constantly evolves, adapts, and transforms. Instead of resisting this natural process, he embraced it with his characteristic kindness, irony, and wonder. He realized that to live is not to subjugate the world to one's firm beliefs, but rather to navigate it with an open mind and a sensitive heart. In our time, Montaigne's figure takes on special significance. In an era when everyone strives to make their voice heard loudly, his voice sounds like a quiet but wise whisper. In a world dominated by categorical assertions, he teaches the art of doubt, reminding us of its lightness and liberating power. For those who feel disoriented and oppressed by the need to conform to rigid frameworks of stability, certainty, and immutability, perhaps what is missing is not clear direction, but freedom. The freedom to change, to admit one's ignorance, and simply to be oneself. However, Montaigne does not limit himself to advocating doubt. He emphasizes the price one pays for fleeing from it. He asserts that the stronger the desire to control every aspect of life, the more suffering arises on that path. We will discuss the invisible suffering that results from desperate attempts to curb what is by nature uncontrollable. There is a pervasive desire to control everything: tomorrow's events, the reactions of others, career trajectory, physical condition, one's own emotions, and even aspects beyond one's influence. And the paradox is that the more one tries to hold life under control, the more it slips away. It's like trying to hold water in your palms. The tighter you squeeze, the more water seeps through your fingers. Have you ever wondered what price you pay for this illusion of control? This obsessive idea is not only exhausting, but also devastating to the psyche. It turns a person into a hostage of unrealistic expectations, an eternal critic searching for the slightest signs of impending disaster. And this state has a name: anxiety. Anxiety, in its essence, represents a fear of unpredictability, a desperate striving for certainty in a world where it is absent. Many people spend their lives in a state of constant vigilance, trying to anticipate every turn of fate, as if this could prevent emotional turmoil. However, as Montaigne astutely observed, and as modern science confirmed only centuries later, attempts to live in anticipation of the future are equivalent to waging a continuous war with reality itself. For, as is known, human suffering stems not only from the events that happen to us, but often from our futile struggle with the inevitable. It is an insatiable desire to see life as different from its actual manifestation, a denial of the natural course of things. Montaigne wrote about this with astonishing frankness, accepting his sufferings, losses, and uncertainties not as obstacles to be eliminated, but as an integral part of human existence. By doing so, he freed himself from the heavy burden of resisting everything. Have you noticed how people striving for total control often turn out to be the most stressed, exhausted, and inflexible? They cannot relax because they are convinced that losing control of a situation will inevitably lead to negative consequences. However, this conviction is not a protection. Rather, it becomes shackles. In contrast, Montaigne proposed conscious surrender, not as an act of cowardly submission, but as a courageous recognition of the fact that the world is no one's servant and that the mind must learn to adapt, not strive for domination. Herein lies the bitter irony. The stronger the desire for control, the more disappointments one experiences. And the more disappointments, the stronger the conviction that even more control is needed. This forms a vicious circle that consumes a person whole. And what is the result? A body constricted by tension, an exhausted mind, and a soul devoid of peace. Montaigne points to an alternative path. A flourishing life is not about total control, but about the ability to exist harmoniously with what is beyond control. But how can this be put into practice? How does one learn to live in conditions of unpredictability without losing oneself? The answer lies in Montaigne's approach to life, in the constant practice of self-reflection, not as a method of cold self-analysis, but as a ritual of deep internal listening. In an era when society craved categorical answers, Michel de Montaigne chose the path of solitude to delve into the exploration of his inner world. What he found there was far from immediate clarity. Rather, it was a turbulent swirl of thoughts and feelings. Contradictory beliefs, subconscious fears, unclear aspirations, irrational impulses. All those aspects of human nature that most people prefer to hide or simply ignore, he decided to confront openly and honestly. However, he approached this not from the position of a critic, but from that of an attentive observer. The greatness of Montaigne's genius was not in creating coherent theories about the human mind, but in his unparalleled courage to become a living embodiment of an experiment in studying human nature. He transformed his own personality into an object of close study, and his literary works became a kind of mirror, reflecting all the subtleties of his inner world. In his famous essays, he does not act as a mentor striving to guide others onto the true path, but as a person sharing his personal experience of self-discovery. He reflects aloud, inviting the reader to join this process. His goal was not to shape minds according to certain dogmas, but to free them from prejudices and stereotypes. By describing his own doubts, his deepest desires, the variability of his opinions, and even moments of weakness, Montaigne demonstrates a revolutionary idea. There is no need to always be right. It is only important to remain in harmony with oneself, to be aware of one's feelings and thoughts. This practice of continuous self-analysis, carried out without any filters or masks, represents one of the most profound forms of self-knowledge available to humanity. However, one must exercise caution. Self-analysis should not turn into ruthless self-criticism. It is rather a process of comprehending the depths of one's self with genuine sincerity and empathy. It is important to learn to recognize moments when one tries to deceive oneself, creating an appearance of knowledge where none exists, or when one forcibly maintains a facade that no longer corresponds to one's true essence. Michel de Montaigne, striving to free himself from such limitations, expressed it thus: "I am human, and nothing human is alien to me." In other words, all internal experiences, however complex or unpleasant, are an integral part of the human personality. The most valuable aspect of this approach is that it eliminates the feeling of shame. By beginning to observe oneself impartially, one realizes that a significant part of one's suffering arises from the desire to conform to an idealized image, from the pursuit of an unattainable model of emotional, intellectual, or moral perfection. Montaigne reminds us that humans are not frozen marble statues, but beings subject to change, imperfect, yet in this lies their unique charm. True simplicity, which everyone so desperately seeks, begins with ceasing to fight one's own nature. Here lies a powerful key to understanding oneself and the world. This acceptance, however, should not be confused with passivity or inaction. On the contrary, acceptance is a necessary first step on the path to any genuine transformation. Only those who have a clear vision of their own essence are capable of real change. Only those who are ready to acknowledge and accept their shadow can confidently move towards the light. But there is yet another important aspect of this complex journey of self-knowledge. Even if one begins to diligently observe oneself and one's reactions, one will inevitably have to confront change. Nothing in a person, in those around them, or in the world as a whole remains unchanged. And until people realize this fundamental truth and learn to live in harmony with it, they will continue to experience suffering and disappointment. The vast majority of people live their lives with the mistaken belief that it should be a straight and predictable line. They believe that by acquiring a certain amount of knowledge, achieving stability, or succeeding, everything in their lives will finally fall into place. They naively believe that there is some ultimate destination where all changes will cease, feelings will stabilize, doubts will disappear, and everything will acquire its final meaning. However, this appealing fantasy, actively promoted by various religions, educational institutions, spiritual leaders, and even corporate culture, actually distances people from reality and deprives them of inner peace. Michel de Montaigne, the French Renaissance philosopher, saw this with exceptional clarity. He perfectly understood that everything in life is in constant motion and pulsates in a continuous flow. Thoughts change, the body ages, people come and go, desires transform, and beliefs dissipate like smoke. Nothing is fixed, nothing is guaranteed, and nothing is final. And trying to live as if this were not so, as if life should be predictable, unchanging, and fully controllable, will inevitably lead to disappointment, suffering, and emotional collapse. Transformations are not merely a confluence of circumstances, but an integral part of our being. The more we resist these changes, the more embittered, irritable, and detached from reality we become. Michel de Montaigne, the French Renaissance philosopher, perceived his own changes as a manifestation of his human nature. He recognized that inconsistency sometimes indicates personal growth, and changing beliefs is a sign of courage. Letting go of outdated ideas, even for others equally uncertain, is a step towards clarity. Constancy is a virtue for machines, not for men, Montaigne asserted, challenging societal norms. In his view, a fulfilling life is not about holding a fixed identity, but about harmoniously interacting with inconstancy. Have you noticed that most of our fears are related to the possibility of change? The fear of losing a loved one, losing a job, or facing drastic changes. But what if, instead of resisting, we begin to accept these transformations as a natural process of life, like Montaigne? What if we stop perceiving every transition as a failure and begin to see in it an opportunity for evolution? Accepting change is not passive submission, but ceasing the struggle with the inevitable flow of reality. It is the ability to navigate the turbulent sea of life instead of building dams. The peace of mind that most people seek is achieved not by imposing stability, but through internal flexibility, the ability to let go, adapt, and be reborn. Long before the era of universal variability, Michel de Montaigne grasped a profound truth about the nature of things. Perhaps the contemporary reader is also beginning to realize this immutable law. However, merely acknowledging changeability as a fundamental property of existence is not a panacea for all ills. The urgent need is to develop the ability to find inner support in conditions of permanent instability. How can one maintain composure and inner balance when doubts, chaos, and uncertainty rage all around? It is in this question that philosophy and practice converge, and it is here that Montaigne points us toward a saving path. He suggests developing mental habits, creating internal rituals that will help us not only survive, but also thrive in a world devoid of firm foundations. Philosophy, detached from real life, turns into empty rhetoric. Montaigne understood this perfectly. His writings are not scholastic treatises, but existential tools designed to help one cope with the challenges of everyday life. He wrote not to impress intellectuals, but to find answers to questions that concern everyone. How to overcome the fear of death, how to deal with sorrow, how to reconcile with uncertainty, how to accept an aging body and a fading mind. And, perhaps, the greatest gift Montaigne left to posterity is the idea that thinking is not just an intellectual exercise, but an act of survival. By reflecting on our lives, we learn to live them more boldly, more consciously, and with less suffering. So, how does one learn to live in conditions of shifting uncertainty? It is not simply an act of resignation, but rather a continuous process of adaptation and reevaluation, requiring conscious self-discipline. Here, discipline is not understood as rigid training, but rather a firm commitment to personal freedom and independence of thought. The ability to comfortably exist in a world of uncertainty is a daily training of mind and spirit. And in this context, principles inspired by Montaigne himself can radically transform your perception of life. First and foremost, question your own beliefs and axioms. Whenever you are overwhelmed with absolute certainty about something, pause, observe, reflect. Often, unwavering certainty is just a mask, concealing a deep-seated fear, a defensive reaction to the discomfort caused by not knowing. This is precisely how Montaigne acted. He questioned even his own thoughts and judgments, not out of insecurity, but from deep wisdom. He understood perfectly that the most dangerous thought is one that does not allow for revision and critical analysis. Second, turn self-analysis into a kind of ritual. Make it a habit to keep regular records. It doesn't matter if it's a personal diary, a letter never to be sent, or just separate notes in the margins. Putting thoughts on paper is a powerful tool that allows you to visualize what troubles and worries you. Montaigne filled hundreds of pages reflecting on himself, not out of vanity or self-admiration, but to better understand himself, to systematize internal chaos, and to make his own mind more organized and understandable. Third, it is worth embracing change as a fundamental principle of existence. Of course, planning is necessary, but one should be prepared to abandon the planned course when circumstances change, which will inevitably happen. True strength lies in the ability to be flexible. Instead of clinging to shaky certainty, one must learn to move forward with ease. Adapt to new conditions, reconfigure your plans, discover new facets within yourself. As Montaigne said, the wisest of people is one who can change along with the world around him. Fourth, it is necessary to cultivate a sense of humor to face one's own vulnerability. Don't be afraid to laugh at yourself. Montaigne did not take himself too seriously, and this is precisely what allowed him to achieve such depth of thought. He was ironic about his contradictions, ridiculed his fears, and poked fun at his own vanity. Humor is a way to avoid being crushed under the weight of one's own exorbitant demands. It is an opportunity to tell yourself, I am just a human, and that's okay. And finally, find time for silence and solitude to be alone with yourself, without any distractions. No phones, no external stimuli, just you and your inner self. Solitude was Montaigne's faithful ally, helping him not to isolate himself from the world, but to gain clarity of thought. It is in silence that you can hear your true thoughts. It is in the pause that the mind gains new organization. And it is in this inner space that uncertainty ceases to be a threat, transforming into fertile ground for new opportunities and discoveries. However, all this powerful practice acquires its true meaning only when one realizes the true value behind it. It is about freedom. Freedom to be oneself, without the obsessive need to know all the answers. It is the freedom to live lightly and effortlessly, even when uncertainty reigns. The freedom to belong to oneself, to feel self-sufficient. It is this theme, internal freedom, born from the acceptance of doubt, with which we conclude our exploration. For Montaigne did not simply want one to survive in chaos. He yearned for one to dance with it, enjoying every moment. Ultimately, everything we so desperately try to control is inherently beyond our power. Life is not designed to fit our emotional schedules or obey our idealized plans. People will inevitably disappoint us, plans will crumble, and feelings will change. And none of these phenomena is a mistake or a deviation from the norm. It is simply the natural course of things, the very nature of being. Montaigne grasped this truth with an almost painful clarity. He realized that suffering arises not from the changes themselves, but from our resistance to them. It stems from the refusal to accept the fact that life is a continuous flow, not a fixed form. When one accepts the inevitability of uncertainty, deep transformations occur within their inner world. It is not external circumstances that change, but the internal state of the individual that is transformed. Inflexibility and rigidity give way to flexibility and adaptability. Worry and anxiety lose their sharpness and significance. The individual stops waging a futile struggle with reality and begins to interact harmoniously with the flow of life, accepting it as it is. This is not a manifestation of passive submission, but an expression of profound wisdom and emotional maturity. It is the attainment of freedom, freedom from the need to control and understand everything. There is no longer a need to label every fleeting feeling, seek a rational explanation for any pain, or strive to find the only right path for every choice. Life does not demand perfection from a person. It only asks for presence, for a full and conscious living of every moment. The simplicity sought by many cannot be found in the external world. It is not in the absence of problems, in a flawless daily routine, or in a meticulously planned future. Simplicity is born the moment one allows oneself not to know everything. In that moment, when one honestly and bravely admits, I don't have all the answers. And that's perfectly okay. It is in this space of humility and acceptance that true peace is born. It is a peace that does not depend on external circumstances, but emanates from the very depths of the soul. Michel de Montaigne, the French philosopher, urged us to acknowledge the limits of our knowledge, asserting that it is in the awareness of one's own ignorance that the path to true humanity and liberation from the shackles of dogmas lies. If the reader has embraced this idea, if the echoes of this message resonate deeply within their soul, it is a testament to their readiness to relinquish illusory control over the world, to breathe deeply the air of freedom, and to live in harmony with their true essence. However, what deep down continues to resist the unknown? What feelings arise when gazing into the future, when the horizon is shrouded in a fog of uncertainty and clear answers escape like a mirage in the desert? What fears and doubts shackle the heart, preventing one from stepping into the